Well, let's just for a second look at who was among the U.S. delegation that came to Moscow a couple of days ago. We have a former business associate of President Trump, Steve Witkoff, who last time I checked was not really occupying an official position in the administration.
Absolutely.
And he was accompanied this time around by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who, for whom it was the first time coming to Moscow. We can assume he has no understanding of the intricacies of the Ukrainian theater. Yet, this is all that Trump could muster to send. I mean, what was glaring was the absence of Marco Rubio, who's, after all, the Secretary of State. And so this highlights a situation which basically would tend to raise the question as to whether or not Trump himself has placed or has the required confidence in key members of his own administration. And I would say that in that sense, it shows that the Russians have been clear. I mean, their positions have been crystal clear for years now, literally, on this particular dossier. And what they want now is a team of professional negotiators to begin working in earnest. Those are very complicated issues that require a lot of technicity, a lot of verification mechanism. And so far, what we have is a couple of guys who have, are known essentially for, business ventures, which is interesting. Obviously, the Russians are never against the idea of sweetening any kind of deal with a prospect for joint ventures and a partnership of all kinds bearing on economic yielding. But for the time being, that's the problem. We don't seem to have anybody from the State Department, trained a contingent to participate in kind of negotiations. Because let's keep in mind those 28 points are not. This is not a plan. This is a series, a template of different thematics around which, consensually speaking, back in Alaska, both President Trump and President Putin agreed to initiate discussions on. So now we got to get our hands under the hood and we got to get our hands dirty and start working on the nitty-gritty of things. And this is where we seem to be somewhat facing difficulties because the State Department, as we all know, is neocon central. I mean, those people, they've been here for decades. They've cleaned out all the paleo-conservatives, all the realists. We see a few of them occasionally intervene on shows like Judge Napolitano's, like the former ambassador to KSA, Sherman, I think his name is. But, those are voices that are few in between. We don't really get to, see a lot of professionals, no-nonsensical voices. Instead, we get, the neocon, and the neocons are alive and well. They've completed against their transition. They always move from one administration to the next. They reinvent themselves, and they're here to stay. So until and unless the America First crowd manages to invest all those institutional levels of powers and cleanse all those globalist/neocon crowd, it's going to be difficult. Keeping in mind that we have a midterm deadline coming up in exactly less than a year now. Polls are not looking too good. If Donald Trump was to lose control of either one of the houses of Congress or both of them, assuming that everything goes copacetic in the negotiation with the Russians over some kind of agreement, if we lose the control of Congress, it might be difficult to get this particular document to be ratified. And so then we're back to square one. So this is going to be, a close call, to be sure. I think now the ball is on the side of the Trump administration. I think they understand the urgency of the situation. I think one of the most important priorities is to get rid of this illegitimate regime in Kiev for a simple reason that they are not legally entitled to sign any kind of document, let alone negotiate. Since, on top of it, they've shown their unwillingness to concede even the most basic ground on what is objectively observable by all who observe the conflict for the last 2 years. And then and only then can we envision maybe holding elections. And although this might not be in and of itself the silver bullet, but one thing for sure, and that's probably what we're saying now, through the peeling of the onion strategy. First, you get rid of Mindich, you get rid of the wallet, then you get rid of Yermak, the gray eminence, and you got about 70 people from the Servant of the People party who are in the crosshair of Nabu and Sapporo. But it needs to go faster, and we need to create such a vacuum around Zelensky that is politically radioactive, which he already is, but it needs to get into the people's head in Kiev. And to the extent, some people might be said to threaten his physical integrity, I was going to say it's par for the course. I mean, you play along, you become a pawn of, the globalists. You were entrusted with a project, you failed to deliver, it's on you. So, like McGregor used to say recently, maybe they'll, ship him out to Tel Aviv. I don't know what they'll do, but one thing's for sure, we need to politics is personnel, and we have the wrong personnel in Kiev right now. So, if anything, in terms of optics, this has to change, and it should have changed, in my opinion, in the first 3 months of the Trump administration, the current one.
Okay,
Clarice, can I respond to a couple of things Arnaud said, because he is right on point on so many things.
Okay, sure.
Well, first of all, Arnaud, the problem with putting more State Department people involved in this is they're the same ones that, like Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, Victoria Nuland, the ones who've admitted they promoted the war for their own advantages. And our State Department, sadly, has no knowledge, kind of as you point out with Witkoff and the son-in-law. They don't know Russia. We've had ambassadors that, like McFaul, that it was a disaster, that does not know or understand Russia. I've used the example of our State Department when it comes to much of our foreign policy. They all go to the same universities. They all learn from the same people. They are all academics who know nothing of the reality of the world. They're like an academic professor who's written numbers of PhD papers about the Kama Sutra, who's studied the Kama Sutra, but has never actually had sex. And those are the people that so often in our State Department are directing our foreign policy. So I tend to think that Witkoff and Kushner are pretty good representatives, not because they understand Russia, but because they know Trump. And Trump and his negotiations with Putin go pretty well, because with Trump, you missing everything is personnel. It's all personal with Trump. And if you have a relationship with Trump, and Witkoff and Kushner do, they're in a better position to more accurately communicate the reality of the business, of the world, of the battlefield, than I think what he gets from his advisors that, as you point out, are the neocons. And Clarice, you pointed out, I think, the other great point of this, in my view, won't get resolved until you resolve Odessa. Odessa is Russian. Odessa should be Russian. And until the Odessa issue is resolved, and I don't think it's going to be resolved directly militarily, I think that Kiev and Ukraine will have to find a way to either have an abject surrender and then surrender Odessa. I don't think you go in militarily and take it. But until Odessa is resolved, you really don't have, I think, a resolution of this. So we may be back in this same position a year from now at Christmas talking about the same issues. And finally, I think Arnaud made a great point of that the neocons have been pushing this, those in our Senate, those in our Congress, who get funded by the military industrial complex, both in Europe and in the US. They are advocating this. We need a new war, which is, in my concern that, okay, what are we picking a war now with Venezuela because that we need to send more missiles, bombs, and airplanes somewhere as the Ukraine conflict seems to ratchet down. And I think that's, again, why I like a Witkoff and a Kushner at the table. Now, I agree with also, Arnaud, that the 28-point plan was really a framework, was really kind of a high level, here's the general agreements. I was very pleased that the meeting between Putin and Witkoff was taking 5 or 6 hours. That tells me they are getting into the nitty gritty, the dirty details that Arnaud was talking about. So I'm a little surprised that the result afterwards was kind of this declaration that we're not close to a deal. We didn't make any movement. Man, that's a lot of talk. And having been involved in negotiations like Arnaud and others, man, you aren't meeting for 5 or 6 hours on a framework without getting into some of the paragraphs and the sentences and kind of what you do. So I think they may have made more progress than we're being told, and hopefully they did. And I think again, the path to peace is for the Europeans basically to be shelved, which is what Donald Trump is saying. Look, you guys are irrelevant. It doesn't matter what you say. All you want to do is continue the conflict, so you don't get a seat at the table. And then the other conflict, I mean, again, this thing's complicated. If it was easy, we'd already pushed the easy button and fixed it. Who do you negotiate with? As Arnaud pointed out, Zelensky doesn't have the authority. The constitution in Ukraine restricts their ability to agree to a transfer of land that's already been taken unless you have an election. You can't have an election until Zelensky allows one. Zelensky doesn't want an election because he will lose. So, what's the chicken and egg situation of how you get to peace when there are some legal frameworks that have to be overcome, some election frameworks that have to be overcome? And again, it may end up with Zelensky in Tel Aviv. And then who do you negotiate with to get the deal done?